The blessed time for the Sabbath worship has come. Today, let us take some time to study the Word of God, the one who plants, the one who waters, and the one who makes things grow. Let us take a look at the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 3, verse 6. In chapter 3, verse 6, it says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. Through these words given in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 3, we can confirm the very important roles in the gospel. Here, God enlightens us through the Bible that we are entrusted with the roles of the one who plants and the one who waters, and that it is God who makes all these living beings grow. If the one who plants the seed does not take the action of planting it in the ground, we cannot expect anything to happen after that. There must be an action to plant something, right? Then, there must also be the one who waters, that is, to take care of what has been planted. However, these are not enough. There must be the one who makes things grow. Who can carry out this role? Without the power of God, we will not be able to harvest anything. Although we keep planting and watering, will we? Thus, we must ask God, who makes things grow. We must seek His grace and pray for His favor, so that what we plant can grow well. Even 3,500 years ago, in the time of Moses, God showed this principle through the history of the forefathers of faith. Let us turn to Exodus chapter 17. In chapter 17, verse 8, it says, The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I'll stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. As soon as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, he took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with this word. Then the Lord said to Moses, Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and called it, The Lord is my banner. He said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. The Israelites fought in the battle against the Amalekites at Rephidim. It was an important battle, but it was really strange. It was Joshua's army that actually fought with swords and spears against the Amalekites. However, the result of the battle was decided at the top of the mountain. When Moses held up his hands, how did the battle at the foot of the mountain change? The situation became favorable for Joshua's army to win. When Moses lowered his hands, because his hands grew tired, the Amalekites were winning. Truly, it was a strange and unpredictable battle. Joshua didn't have a direct influence on the battle against the Amalekites. What was the source of power that allowed the Amalekites to win? The result of the battle depended on Moses, who was at the top of the mountain, whether he held up his hands or lowered his hands. It is the same for us. We often look only at the visible things and judge whether our spiritual gospel ministry has gone well or has faltered based on what is visible to our eyes. However, in reality, where does all the power come from? It all comes from God. And it is God who controls everything. We must never forget this truth. That is why it is written in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 that the one who plants and the one who waters are nothing. The most important factor is God who makes things grow. In other words, no matter how many times we plant and water it, without the providence of the one who makes things grow, the work of planting and watering will be meaningless. Think about the battle at Rephidim against the Amalekites. It was not that Joshua had excellent swordmanship and good strategy in commanding the soldiers. That was not how victory was decided. Depending on whether Moses held up his hands or lowered his hands on the mountain, sometimes the Amalekites were winning, and sometimes the Israelites were winning. Under this principle, Aaron and Hur stood on each side of Moses and helped him by holding his hands up because his hands grew tired. As his hands remained steady until sunset, what did the Israelites' army do? They defeated all the Amalekites. Such an amazing work of power came upon them. Why is all this history written in the Bible? It is written as a lesson for us who are living today. What kind of lesson does God want to teach us that He had this history recorded? What is the reason God provides an opportunity to hear this lesson for all people in the future generations who believe in God? Doesn't it teach us that we should not focus only on what is visible to our eyes? Doesn't it teach us that we should always earnestly pray to God, who gives us strength and power in the invisible world? This is why the writer of Psalms wrote in Psalm chapter 121 that for as long as he lived, God helped him every moment in his life so that his kingdom would prosper, and even delivered him from the hand of his enemies. Let us turn to Psalm chapter 121. In Psalm chapter 121 it says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from. Where does it come from? The Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. What people could see was the battle between Joshua's army and the Amalekites. Nevertheless, the victory depended on Moses, who was at top of the mountain, whether he held up his hands or lowered his hands. It is the same with our life of faith. The one who plants and the one who waters are the visible ones. However, God who makes things grow carries out His work in the invisible world. Let's say we plant a living being, water it, and make all kinds of environments for it to grow and be nurtured. Without the providence and operation of God who makes things grow, no living being can exist on this earth. Isn't this true? That is why the writer of Psalms wrote, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? In every moment of his life, there have been tens of thousands of invisible acts of help from God. It was not his accomplishments. What about King Cyrus? He thought that it was he who had defeated his enemies in battle, and that everything was accomplished by his own valor and wit. Also, in conquering Babylon, he thought that such work could be done because of his own bravery and cleverness. However, he later realized that God had already prophesied what would happen to him through the prophet Isaiah. I will go before you and will break down gates of your enemies and cut through bars of iron. I will give you victory so that you can have hidden treasures and riches stored in secret places. Before Cyrus was born, the prophet had already prophesied about him in this way, and God had led Cyrus to live his life following this path. When King Cyrus did not know the prophecy, he thought that he had done all that work, and always focused on physical things, such as his resourcefulness and the bravery of his troops. However, as he read the prophecy that had been written before his birth, he was surprised. He was truly amazed that God even mentioned the name Cyrus in the book of prophecy. In the same way, God is always with us in every moment of our lives. When we walk with God, we can always be victorious. However, when we do not walk with God, but live a life that does not please God, and rather live apart from God, no matter how many people around us help, can our efforts bear any fruit? It will never come to fruition. We should live a life that is helped by God. Let us continue to look at 2 Kings chapter 5. Let us turn to 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 8. When Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram, but he had leprosy. Naaman heard what people say in Israel and came to meet Elisha. He was commander of the army of a country, that is, a minister of national defense, who was regarded as the highest-ranking official in that country. When such a high-ranking official comes, people would come out and bow down before him. But instead, Elisha sent a messenger to deliver his message. Let us continue with verse 11. But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman visited Elisha to be cured of his leprosy. But Elisha did not treat him as he had expected. He thought Elisha should come out and make a wondrous performance to cure his leprosy. Although there was a visitor, Elisha didn't even come out to greet him, but sent a messenger to deliver the message: "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored." Thus he was going to return to his country with a disappointed heart. At that time, Naaman's servants came and tried to persuade him not to do so. Let's see verse 13. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Let us look at this history about Naaman in the time of Elisha. At first, Naaman thought that Elisha would carry out a ceremony that was grand and magnificent in the eyes of humans. At that time, there was no cure for his disease. It was something that could not be cured except through the supernatural power of God. That is why it was hard for him to believe when the prophet gave such a simple direction. Although such a high-ranking person came, the prophet didn't even come out to meet him, but sent a messenger to tell him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored." Because of this, Naaman was greatly hurt. However, at that time, the servants who followed him said, "If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it in order to be cured? How much more then, when he tells you to do something very easy? Why don't you give it a try?" After listening to their words, Naaman changed his mind, went to the Jordan River, and washed himself 7 times. Then surprisingly, his flesh was restored. By looking at this history, we need to ask ourselves, who played a great role in the invisible world for this work to be accomplished? Naaman expected that some grandiose ceremony, an event, would take place physically. However, Elisha gave him a very simple direction. It didn't seem to him that his disease would be cured in that way. There's an important matter we need to point out in this history at the time of the kings. We can confirm the fact that the true source of power is found in the invisible world, not in the visible world. The secret of power comes from the invisible one. Who is it? It is God. Where does my help come from? Where does the help come from? We must always pay attention to the fact that the help comes from God. Let us take a look back at all the journeys of our life we have walked so far. At every moment, God has helped us, guided us, and carried out His work so that we can finally come into Zion. God has led us and guided all of us into such grace we have today. We are able to come here today, not because we are smart enough to understand the Bible at once, and to realize the Passover as soon as we heard about it, or because we are better than others, that we could believe in Heavenly Father and New Jerusalem Heavenly Mother immediately. God chose us before the creation of the world and led us to where we are today, moment after moment, without taking His eyes off of us. We must never forget this fact. Therefore, since God said, "Give thanks in all circumstances," let us give thanks in every circumstance. Let's move on to 2 Kings chapter 19. 2 Kings 19 records the history of King Hezekiah, and it depicts a scene when Judah was attacked by Assyria. Verse 13. Where is the king of Hamath, or the king of Arpad? Where are the kings of Lair, Sepharvaim, Hena, and Iva? Hezekiah received a letter from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to the words Sennacherib has sent to ridicule the living God. It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them. For they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord, our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God." This is the scene where King Hezekiah was trembling with great fear and prayed to God. The kingdom of Assyria was the most powerful country at that time. Such a powerful country was coming down to attack the kingdom of Judah. Being in this position, King Hezekiah had no one to rely on other than God. He could never even imagine that he would be able to defeat them with his own national defense. Since he was in such a situation, he earnestly prayed to God. Then God gave him the answer. Let us move on to verse 30. Once more a remnant of the kingdom of Judah will take root below and bear fruit above. For out of Jerusalem will come a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Therefore, this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter the city. It means that he will not even reach this city. Or shoot an arrow here, he will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter the city, declares the Lord. I will defend this city and save it, for my sake and for the sake of David, my servant. Judging from the number of the soldiers and their strength, it was impossible for the kingdom of Judah to fight against them. However, something amazing happened overnight. Let us continue with verse 35. That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. It was a situation where Judah could not stand the attack of Assyria. From any perspective, the kingdom of Judah was inferior and weak. However, that very night, the heavenly army came down and struck 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Verse 36. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. One day, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons Adrammelech and Saretzar killed him with the sword, and they